The 400 Blows is a 1959 French new wave drama film directed by François Truffaut. It follows the story of Antoine Doinel, played by Jean-Pierre Law, a teenager that lacks attention from his parents, misunderstood by everyone around him, and eventually delves in a life of petty crimes. The title, The 400 Blows, is a direct translation that is often misinterpreted. The original French title, Les coups sont coups, is from the French idiom, faire les coups sont coups, which means to raise hell, suggesting that everyone misunderstands the main character Antoine Doinel as hell, and his parents' annoyance for having to raise him. The opening sequence of the 400 Blows consists of 5 different moving shots. The 5 shots are shot from different parts of the city, but the Eiffel Tower is visible in the background all the time. The use of different shots imitates the point of view of someone riding in a car around the city, which parallels Antoine spending his time roaming in the city when he skips school. This may be the perspective of Antoine. However, the point of view circles the Eiffel Tower, but rarely gets close to the tower, except in the 5th shot of the sequence. The Eiffel Tower may be an iconography that represents dominant authority, which can symbolize Antoine's parents and teachers. While they are always there, they never pay him the attention he needs or care about him, but instead they always push him away. Although in the 5th shot the audience can finally see a closer shot of the Eiffel Tower, meaning that Antoine can finally be close to his authority figures, it is only for a few seconds, and the shot then tracks backwards and moves further and further away from the tower, suggesting that Antoine is immediately rejected, even as he tries to seek and build a relationship with the authority figures in his life. There is also a pan as the shot tracks backwards, showing that as Antoine is isolated by the people around him and distances himself, he actually looks back to the city, where he spends most of his time in. Furthermore, the Eiffel Tower may also represent the city and the society Antoine lives in, and because he is misunderstood to be a troubled teenager, he is also rejected by the society. This contrasts greatly with the opening sequence in City of God. City of God is a Brazilian crime film directed by Fernando Meirelles. The film depicts the violent neighborhood in the slums of Rio de Janeiro, and the environment children in this neighborhood grow up in. Like Antoine in The 400 Blows, these children's hopes for the future and dreams and aspirations gradually fade as they grow up. But it is not due to their parents or teachers. Instead, their hopes die because of guns, murders, and drugs. In the opening of City of God, the atmosphere is immediately intensified when we see fast cuts of a close-up of a knife being sharpened on stone. There is instantly a juxtaposition between the diegetic sound of the knife to the upbeat samba background music. This allows the audience to feel divided and brings out the complication of the favela. The chicken later gets killed, and this may be an iconography of metaphoric headless chickens, and may symbolize the children growing up in City of God, like the runts. The children are in a sense innocent because they don't know what they are doing, and they have no idea of the future, but they also lost their innocence as they cause chaos by shooting multiple bullets to something as worthless as a chicken. This adds to the enigma code and poses a question to the audience. Why do these children see this as a part of their normal life? Moreover, chase scenes are one of the genre conventions of gangster movies, but normally these chase scenes are done with cars. However, in City of God, the children chase the chicken by foot, suggesting the irony about their upbringing in this society. They are not old enough to drive, but they are old enough to shoot with a gun. The low-angle shot of the children shows the power over the chicken, but the use of lighting here causes the children to appear like dark silhouettes and their face cannot be seen. This strips away the identity of each individual children, but also implies that all the young people that grow up in City of God is the same, no matter who they are. They end up causing chaos. The chaos stops when it cuts to the main character Rocket, and this may mean that the chicken that escaped is supposed to represent him, as he was able to leave the City of God and grow up to fulfill his aspirations in becoming a photographer. Like the 400 Blows, in the opening there were shots that circled around the subject, which, in this case, is Rocket. He feels like he is being trapped in the City of God once again when the camera circles around him, and this brings the audience back to the 1960s. There is a clear difference in lighting and the use of color between the 1960s and the opening, which is the 1980s. In the early era, when the favela was only a developing place for people to live in, people in the City of God worked together to achieve. Although the trio robbed, they shared the money with everyone, and people protected them by covering them. There is a golden tint in the early era, which may convey that the 1960s were actually the golden age of the favela. Ironically, this was the time when the favela was the least developed. While the place was very underdeveloped, it gave children a ray of hope. The golden tint can also represent the innocence of youth and aspirations. The children were all very young, and they had dreams about the future, about escaping poverty. However, the color gradually becomes darker, and a shade of grey masks over the scenes in the 1970s when Low Z starts rising to power. Low Z is constantly shot in a low angle, and the camera movement also becomes more static and up close to give the feeling of claustrophobia to the audience and the feelings of fear towards Low Z. Finally, in the 1980s, which is the era of the opening scene, the editor uses a blue and grey color palette. Blue is often used in dystopian films as it is a cold color. However, with the use of a blue palette and a raw handheld style of filming, the film feels like a documentary and gives a feeling of horror as it becomes clear that City of God is portraying a reality. The shots are sometimes more highly saturated as if it is a dream, but in fact it is a reality and not an alternate reality. With a lot of scenes filmed from the point of view of Rocket, the narrator, the film feels even more realistic and documentary-like. The color palette also becomes really dark and contrasts greatly to the golden tint in the 1960s. Like the 1960s, this represents the children's fate. But this time, as the children is growing up, they realize their destinies of being stuck in the favelas. The color becomes even darker as the war between the drug dealers develop. The use of color is not as prominent in the 400 Blows as the film is a black and white film, but like the children in City of God, Antoine realizes his fate and feels hopeless. As film critic Jim Emerson has said, the freedom suggested by the movement of the opening contrasts with the movement of the final shot. Although Antoine is rejected in the city at the start, he still had the freedom to go wherever he wanted around the city. But after being misunderstood and rejected multiple times, he is pushed to the borders. Even as he escapes from the observation center for troubled youths, he is so rejected by society he has nowhere to go. The final shot in the film tracks Antoine to the edge of the ocean and then zooms close to his face. The audience is given the impression that the camera keeps finding ways to move, paralleling with Antoine trying to find places to escape or to find somewhere where he belongs. But the whole film ends on a freeze frame as Antoine runs out of room to run. The 400 Blows also gives an impression that it is like a documentary, as Antoine looks directly at the camera in the final shot. Antoine comes to the realization that he is running for a freedom that he will never reach and stops to look back. He's in the center of the roll of thirds in this scene, and his direct contact with the camera may be an accusatory look on society. Antoine was on the beach where he was caught between land and water, symbolizing his past and future, but he looks back to the camera, which is like looking back at society, because he realizes that the pressure and misunderstanding of society is closing on him no matter what, and he has nowhere to go as he cannot step forward to embrace his future. Just like a documentary, the subject, Antoine, notices the camera, and just like City of God, it suggests that Antoine's story is real, and perhaps connote that everyone goes through rejection as they grow up. Julian Cornell, professor of media studies in Queen's College, said that if you say that the end point of a coming-of-age story is supposed to be, now you're a man or woman, that's very shallow. It's almost saying your life is over now, you're old enough, and you've learned whatever lessons you were supposed to learn. The 400 Blows is ongoing. It basically says, again, more truthfully, that this is the end of this chapter. In this sense, Antoine loses his innocence as a child as the chapter ends, and loses his aspiration as he realizes that he may have to conform to society as he grows up. But it doesn't stop here. As his life goes on, he needs to keep conforming to society.